So hello everybody and welcome to our webinar on how to navigate coronavirus with Beyond Pricing. My name is Matt Stammers. I am your host today and I'm delighted to welcome you onto this call. We know from speaking to so many of you over the last few weeks that these are some of the most challenging times that we've seen in this industry. And many of you, we know, are facing very significant cancellations and associated loss of revenue. I'm based here in San Francisco, although I'm a Brit, and I can tell you from personal experience that watching how the situation is changing day by day can feel very scary, and it makes for some very uncertain times. So the first point that I want to say on behalf of everybody at Beyond Pricing is that we hear you, we're here for you, and we will do everything that we can to help you navigate these very uncertain times. At Beyond Pricing, our first value is that we care. And that means that we place you, our customers, and wider property managers in the industry at the center of everything that we do as a business. And I know that sounds really cliche, but I think it's really important that we say it because it's something that we truly believe. It's something that actually guides what we do every day. And it's with this in mind that we're launching this series of webinars together with an awful lot of online support. And it's aimed at giving you the vital information that you need to help you make it through the short term. And then as we start to come out of this crisis, to build a more resilient and more robust business into the future. So as I said, today is the first in the series of these webinars. Our goal today is to provide you with the insights that you need in terms of what's happening on the market trends and how they might be applicable to your business, and to give you practical pricing and revenue management strategies that you can action today to make a difference to your business. And for this call, we have both customers and also other people who are not customers for Beyond Pricing. And the goal is to share information and to help regardless. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're a customer or you're not a customer. Really what we want to do is to help you as much as we can. So with this, let me introduce the team that I've got with me. So as I said, my name is Matthew Stammers. I head up Beyond Pricing. I'm delighted to be with this company. I've been with Beyond Pricing for just over 2 months now. And what I see every day is the passion that we have for helping our customers in the industry, for really helping people price better. With me, I have Jessie Lott and Tess Brown, sorry. Jessie and Tess, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. As Matt said, I'm Jessie Lott. I work in strategy and operations here at Beyond Pricing, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you today.
And my name's Tess Brown. I work in our customer success management team. So I've been working with our customers over the past couple weeks as everything's unfolded with coronavirus, and really excited to be speaking with everyone today.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessie. Thanks, Tess. It's great to have you both with us today. I mean, much like yourselves, every day is incredibly busy. So both Jessie and Tess are taking time out of their day to try and help. So we're going to jump into some content shortly, and I'll talk through the agenda that we're going to cover. But before we do so, I just wanted to touch on some logistics and some housekeeping. In terms of timing, we have about 45 minutes to an hour for this webinar. So we have plenty of time. And the idea is that we'll actually run the presentation side for about 40 minutes or so, with Jessie talking for 20 and then Tess talking for 20. And so it's going to give plenty of time for you to ask questions. And these webinars, these sessions really come alive when you get involved. So please don't hesitate to ask a question. If we don't get to it today, we will absolutely follow up. The way to ask the question is if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon that has a couple of speech bubbles and it has Q&A underneath it. You can click on that and you can type a question in there. We'll be seeing those live as we go through the session. If something particularly interesting comes up that's worthwhile pausing the conversation for, I'll make sure I'll ask either Jessie or Tess. Otherwise, as I said, we'll pick them up and get into a Q&A session at the end. The other point to make is that this webinar is being recorded. So we have a fantastic number of people who have taken the time to join today, and that's amazing. There's also a lot of other people out there today who haven't been able to make it. So what we're doing is recording this webinar. We'll then share the link with everybody afterwards, and we'll also make it available on our website as well, so that if you don't get time to listen to all of it, or if you want to share it with other people, you'll be able to do that. So Tess, if you could take us on to the agenda. So agenda, we've talked through the introductions. We've met the team virtually, myself and Jesse and Tess. Jesse is up next, so he's going to cover what's happening in terms of reservations, cancellations, what the booking trends look like, and we're going to look at that within the US, and so from a US perspective, but also from a global perspective, and look at how Europe is faring as well. He's then going to hand over to Tess, and Tess is going to take more of a deep dive into what are the strategies that you can adopt today. So both what are the pricing strategies that you can adopt, what are the wider revenue management strategies that you can adopt? And for those of you who are already customers, how can you apply those today in the Beyond Pricing tool? So we're going to walk through some of the features and functionality that the tool offers you. I think the last thing to say before I hand over is that our goal at the moment is not to sell, it's very much to help. So the idea behind all of the advice that we're providing today is about helping you with where you are at present. And it's about doing as much as we can to help you get through the short term, and then, as you said, building a more robust business into the longer term. We'll finish off with Q&A, so plenty of time for that. So please get the questions coming. And with that, Jesse, let me hand over to you and talk us through what's happening.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So, yeah, as Matt mentioned, we'll spend some time going through not only cancellations, but also rebooking. But before that, we'll spend a couple minutes just going through what we've seen in the algorithms, some of the changes that we've made, as well as some of the resources that we've made available. Before we hop into the material today, just want to take a quick moment to thank you for being here. This is an incredibly stressful and difficult time for everybody in the industry. And any amount of time that you spend away from your day jobs is very appreciated. So thank you very much. Tess, if you don't mind. Thank you. So before hopping into too much material, wanted to point out a support page that we've created in the name of transparency, in the name of giving data to all. We're publishing a lot of what we look at internally. So a lot of the dashboards we've spun up and put them out publicly. We put a number of Q&A, questions and answers in there. It's a great first stop resource. I mean, in addition to this, feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. But whether you're, to Matt's point, a customer, non-customer, partner, whatever it may be, feel free to hop in there, dive through the data, and try to inform your decisions a little bit better. And looking in the data, we've been seeing this for a while, depending on which market you're looking at. But we went ahead and actually formalized a COVID-19 factor in our algorithm that displays through in the actual tool. So what you're going to be seeing over the next 30, 60, 90 days is anytime you log in, you'll see an adjustment in price downwards in response to the coronavirus and the effect it's having on bookings and cancellations. So it will be explicit in the dashboard, and you'll be able to see what the effect is in your market. Keep in mind that these are dynamic factors, so they change depending on market. So those managers that are on the line, keep in mind that it's going to be different between different parts of your portfolio. Additionally, our revenue management team has been taking a look at any holiday or event pricing and making adjustments manually where needed. But we've been trying to act as quickly as possible and make adjustments as necessary. So before we hop into the data, just a word on where it's coming from. At Beyond Pricing, we are connected to about 240,000 individual listings. So this is real-time data that we're actually pulling out of property management systems and various other systems. So what you're looking at is real time. We've pulled out some of the scaling on some of the charts, but where we could, we've left in as much information as we possibly can. So within the data, I'll get into cancellations first, looking at it through the lens of just the US, and then we'll look at US relative to the rest of the world. We'll get into new reservations, and then some of the regulation that we've been seeing and some of the effects of that. But what you're looking at now, that is a chart of cancellations over time. So pretty much when they are hitting the calendar across different markets. And a way to read this is the x-axis across the bottom is dates. It flows from February of this year out through pretty much July, middle of summer. And then each line represents a different market. So I'll pull your eyes to the top of the chart with Chicago. And the way to read this is at the high point, which is in the middle of March, Chicago had about 85% of cancellations on the books cancel. So I don't think that I need to tell any urban managers on the line that you guys have been hit especially hard, but we have seen just a mass cancellation spree in urban markets across not only the US, but internationally. The trend continues to a lesser extent in ski markets. That really hit in the beginning of March with the closure of ski hills. Altera and Vail, for example, they both announced within 24 hours they're going to be shutting down their entire portfolio of ski hills. And you can see that in the data. There was a sharp increase in cancellations, and we've seen that begin to taper off. And we have, while there has been some activity of cancellations through summer, it's been relatively muted in ski markets so far. One kind of highlight or one portion of data to note as being a relative standout are drive-to markets within the US. So places like Florida Panhandle, Alabama Gulf Coast, Smoky Mountains, Oregon Coast, Hilton Head Island have all held up relatively well. And when I say relatively well, it's within the context of the other cancellations that we've seen. I mean, we're seeing between 30 and 40% cancellations. Compare that with an urban market up in the 80s. So performing relatively well comparatively. But a couple things to note within the US is we had a relatively late increase in cancellations, as in cancellations really didn't kick up until early March. We're about to compare rest of world, and you'll see it begin to, you'll see cancellations begin to increase much earlier in the year. But the US really didn't start until March. And then on the far side of the curve, so from May on, we see cancellation rates almost return back to normal. So folks are not canceling their summer holidays, and we'll compare that to Europe in a second. Tess, if you don't mind, one forward. Oh, excuse me, here it is. So this is the same chart, same data point. So you're looking at number of cancellations by week. From left to right, we have the same time periods. But one thing that you're going to notice on the left-hand side is Europe, as I'm sure that you're all aware, hit this far earlier than we did. Similarly, Japan. So we could begin to see the spike in cancellations hitting in mid-February, really intensifying through the beginning of March. And what's more important here is people are canceling their trips further out into the future. So that's just an absolute loss in revenue for many managers out in Europe, Australasia, and Asia. So very difficult times. And then we included the US curve as well. So you can see it, it's the dashed blue line. It's relatively muted. It starts later than most of Europe and most of Australia. But the UK, which had a similar approach as the US to the coronavirus and a lot of the shelter-in-place laws that we've seen roll out, pretty similar trajectory. And there's a key element in all of this data that you're going to notice is regulations are playing a massive role in this. So over the last 24 hours, the UK government has actually rolled out larger preventative measures for the coronavirus or COVID-19. So expect these to tick up, expect that curve of cancellations to be more pronounced, and we will likely see a larger number of cancellations out into summer. And then lastly, I'll point out Australia, which had a similar trajectory to the US as far as being late to the party for cancellations, but it has been more extreme in aggregate across the country. So there's sort of in between the US and rest of world. So this is a little bit different way to look at the data, and there are some aberrations here. But a high level, what you should take from this is that cancellations are beginning to form more of a bell curve shape, and that we started slow in the US, increased through the middle of March, and we're on the downslope. And the way to read these charts is, I'll pull your eyes to East Coast vacation markets, for example. You can look at that red block. which is 312. And then you can look at that yellow block next to it, that's 313. And the way to read that is we're scaling these relative to other markets, so we had to right size. The way to read that is that in East Coast vacation markets, there were twice as many cancellations on 313 as there were on 312. So we're seeing just exponential growth in the number of cancellations and then a slowdown in more recent days. Now you're going to notice some spikes at different periods. I mean, I'll call attention to the right side of the East Coast vacation market. That includes places like Hilton Head, Florida Panhandle, Destin, large major markets that have seen government intervention. So as many of you guys are aware, or many of you all are aware, local governments have been shutting down beaches, trying to inform public behavior through different regulatory rules. And so we can see these spikes in cancellations, almost one-to-one correlation with when local governments are stepping in. So large spikes from local regulation, but absent of those, in most markets, we do begin to see a downturn in the number of cancellations right around the 15th or 16th of March. And it's also important to note before moving on, major cities, urban markets have been hit especially hard. Keep in mind that these are scaled. And so while the shape is correct, and actually the scale is correct, we're coming off of elevated levels. They were hit harder by cancellations earlier. So that's pushing down those values, but the shape is really what we want to look at here. And so this is going to come at no surprise, or come as no surprise to anybody on the call. The pace of new reservations has been slowing. So way to read this, this is by day, scaled to the first day of the period. So we have March 11th is the tall blue line on the left-hand side of each market. And then each day scales down as far as the number of new reservations. And it's pretty consistent across each and every market that we have not seen any kick up in the number of new reservations happening. It's all been downhill with a slowdown in cancellation. So we're trying to trade off the value of, hey, we're actually losing what's on the books and we're not putting as much on. So how do you want to actually manage prices to capture demand where it's actually possible? And so this is a phenomenon that we wanted to point out. We're seeing this in primarily drive-to markets, and it's a little bit of a rough chart, but the data here is very valuable. And what this is showing is the number of new reservations made by date looking forward. So an easy way to think of this is, say you're sitting at home in Atlanta, you want to take a vacation in Destin, for example, and so you book a week out on March 9th, that high peak would be that week out. And so the further out you go on the calendar, that's you moving right on this chart. And so one thing that we've seen in the data, and we've seen local regulators try to enact and try to stop this exact behavior, is the majority of new bookings are coming in the very shortest part of the window. They're not behaving as though you might expect, which is booking vacations out further in the year. It's all been focused largely on the next week. And we've seen local governments come in to play pretty heavily. I know Tillamook County in Oregon coast, they ended up banning vacation rentals for the next 30 days. Hilton Head Island recently closed their beach. Many beaches in the Panhandle are closed for the time being, although there's talk of opening some of them up. So it is, it is this behavior that many governments are trying to target. And so here we are looking at discounts on the short term. Wanted to show a little bit about how new ADRs are coming in relative to how they did pre-crisis. So what you're looking at is two different markets, but let's focus on blue and blue. So the solid blue up top, that's going to be Hawaiian ADRs prior to the crisis hitting, so before March 11th. And then the dashed line at the bottom is ADRs made after that. And so in markets where there's a longer lead time, typical fly-to markets, we're seeing a larger variance in new prices versus old prices, meaning that as people go to book, they're looking for steep discounts. You can compare that to another market like the Smoky Mountains, which we have here, which is yellow. Again, we have the solid yellow line, and then we have the dash yellow line showing reservations made after the coronavirus really kicked into gear. We're seeing a smaller variance between pre and post, and that's really a function of one, higher demand, two, the type of market being drive to. They're a little bit better at kind of picking up locals and people who may be able to hop in the car for 5 to 8 hours, whatever it might be. But stronger demand in drive to markets. Keep in mind as you review these types of markets and try to get your pricing strategy going, there is the element of regulation roulette and trying to figure out what the local government will be doing. So are they going to be shutting down beaches like they have in some markets, banning vacation rentals, whatever it might be? But all things being equal, drive to markets have seen less of a decrease in pricing. So a few key takeaways. Dynamics have varied drastically by region. The United States was late to the party, so to speak. We hadn't seen the cancellations really kick into gear until, call it, second or third week of March. Urban markets were hit the hardest. Drive to vacation areas performing relatively well, but always keep in mind that local governments are the wild cards during this time period. It's important to get an idea of if they're going to act, what the local behavior is, and how that'll impact your business. Europe has been hit incredibly hard with cancellations extending all the way out through summer. And you can contrast that with US markets, which haven't had the wave of cancellations that Europe has through prime booking season in summer. And then ADRs will decrease in the short term. But as we review the data and we try to create new strategies looking forward, we urge you to view this through the lens of, we will be talking about this in the future, talking about a recovery. So how do we focus on sustainability and being dynamically placed to be able to increase prices when the opportunity is correct? So with that, I'll pass it over to Tess to talk through some pricing strategies and how you can use the tool to change your prices.
Perfect. Thanks, Jesse. So now that you have all that data in mind, we wanted to share some practical implementations that you can use beyond pricing to create both a long-term and a short-term pricing strategy. We're really in uncharted territory right now, so having a forward-looking occupancy tool like Beyond Pricing is going to be important now more than ever, particularly as, you know, historically you might have relied on your previous year's occupancy and average daily rate information to inform your future rates. The great thing about being a customer with us or a prospective customer is that our revenue management team is actively analyzing the markets, looking at forward-looking occupancy to set you up in the best position once, you know, the effects of coronavirus are realized both in the short term and long term. So that said, what I wanted to share with you all today is the things that you can do immediately today to take action on your pricing strategy, what you can do in the short term and beyond pricing, the medium and long term. So I'll dive into each of these in detail of who they affect and who they're best used for. And then I'll also show you how to set those in the Beyond Pricing tool itself in a demo account. So that said, the first tool that I wanted to share with you is the minimum price. This is an immediate solution for anyone, any property manager, regardless of your market, drive to, fly to, urban, rural. Today, our customers know that the minimum price is the absolute lowest your property owner will ever accept throughout the year. So now's a really good time to review your annual minimum price, or if you do have any seasonal minimum prices in place, to make sure that these outdated settings aren't prohibiting getting new bookings, and potentially try to lower as much as possible. So speak with your owner. What are their utility costs? What are their turnover costs? Do they have concerns about their mortgage, and what do they actually need to cover those costs? Next up, the immediate solution you can take in the short term is looking at your minimum stay requirements. So again, this is for any type of property manager, regardless of your market. The nice thing is for most of our customers, you can set your minimum stay requirements directly in Beyond Pricing, depending on your PMS or the OTA that you list on. For those that are in more traditional markets that utilize changeover days for a high season, for example, if you utilize a 7-day minimum with Saturday to Saturday changeovers in summer, now might be a good time to review those and potentially remove them. The reason being is, you want to get more eyes on your property, and you also want to create some sort of flexibility for guests when they do travel to you to have a different length of stay. If you are still going to utilize strict minimum stay requirements, we would recommend that you utilize the Beyond Pricing gap filling feature, which allows you to fill in open dates between reservations. Next up, we have a short-term solution for you. So as Jesse mentioned in the beginning, we do have that COVID-19 factor in place in the short term to decrease pricing market by market. But if there's any more drastic changes that you want to make in terms of a short-term solution over the next 2 weeks or so, and get really aggressive before you either have a lockdown in place because of regulation in your city and county, you can use something that we're calling manual overrides. So I'll show you in a second in the tool, but in our bulk actions tool, you have the ability to do percentage decreases, or you can do a specific rate if desired. But essentially what this means is you can lower pricing on top of our predicted pricing in the short term to hopefully capture any available demand if there is any, if you're in one of those drive-to markets that is still open. Things to note here, this will create static rates. So any changes that we make on our end to the algorithm, or if you put any additional discounting, the manual overrides will lock in those pricing. Next up, for a medium-term solution over the next 30 or 60 days, this is one of our most conservative strategies. Particularly, we're advising customers in drive-to markets to utilize these last-minute discounts. So essentially what this means is on a rolling basis, you can add discounting in a tiered fashion, and it still allows the algorithm to influence rates. So unlike the manual overrides, it doesn't create static rates, but on a rolling basis, you could have, a 45% discount, a 30% discount, depending on the length of time. The nice thing is this still does allow for historical booking lead times to be taken into account. It's a little bit of a less aggressive strategy, but it still won't go below whatever annual minimum price or seasonal minimum price you have in place. So be sure you're reviewing those first. And then one thing to note, once we are back in normal booking times, coronavirus is no longer impacting the travel industry as much as it is now, you'll just need to revisit these and adjust back to where you had them previously. Last up, our most long-term solution and also the most aggressive strategy we're advising our customers, regardless of market, is to lower your base price. So for those that are unfamiliar with the base price is the starting point for all fluctuations within Beyond Pricing. We create 365 days of rolling rates, all from a starting point, which is a base price. So for our existing customers, lowering this base price holistically lowers rates throughout the year. And we're advising any property managers that are in fly-to markets or those that have longer booking lead times to review and adjust base prices accordingly for summer, next fall, even next year, to adjust, see what's going on in terms of that pricing strategy and get more aggressive where needed. Again, this is going to take some analysis to figure out where to actually set those base prices. And then just one thing to note, having those open and honest conversations with your property owners about what's realistic in terms of your average daily rates for high season. So we know many of our customers are coming into high season today, or there are particular events like, let's say, 4th of July that are coming up. Talking with those owners and explaining that historically achievable rates are probably not going to be relevant for this year given the current market conditions. So we'll need to closely monitor performance and see what's going on there. So that said, those are the couple strategies. Now I actually wanted to dive into the tool itself and show you guys what this actually means. So switching over here, this is the Beyond Pricing dashboard. Within the dashboard itself, I'm going to show you how to set all of those things that I just talked about. So the first one that I wanted to show is using the bulk actions tool. So on the dashboard, we're currently in card view. If you switch over to table view, you can select the applicable listings, which pulls up this edit button. So clicking this edit button allows you to not only adjust your minimum stay requirements, so your annual minimum stays for any properties, any seasonal minimum stays you may have, but you can also use this manual overrides feature to adjust pricing in the short term. We're usually suggesting within about the next 2 weeks or so, if needed. Again, we do have that coronavirus factor, so be sure to look at the pricing and see what action needs to actually be taken before setting any of these. So in this example, let's say I wanted to decrease pricing by 10% over the course of the next day. I could press Save Changes. This double checkbox will come up. If I press Save Changes, that will implement a 10% discount over the next day, creating static pricing for all of my listings. The nice thing about this bulk actions feature is it will send you a confirmation email of what changes you have done and to what listings. So now let's actually go and click into a listing and take a look at the couple of things that are going on within the listing itself. So the first thing that I wanted to point out on this calendar page, which is the first page that you'll see in your listing, is if you hover over any of the dates, you'll actually be able to see that COVID-19 factor that our revenue management has put in place for each market specifically. So each market will have a different factor depending on what's going on in your market with cancellations and occupancy. But you can see for this listing that I have up here, we're subtracting $58 from our predicted price because of coronavirus. So all of the strategies that I'm giving you today would be in addition to what our team has already done for you, but you can see what that pricing actually looks like with that final predicted price. Next up, I wanted to show the minimum price. So if I switch over here to chart view, I can see a couple of different lines going on this graph. The first line we have is the blue solid line that has a lot of jagged spikes up and down. That is our predicted price, and that's all coming from this base price of $165, which is the starting point for all the fluctuations. In the short term, what I'm going to be worrying about mostly is this minimum price, which is our red line right here. So in the next month or so, you can see for the most part, we are hitting that minimum price, meaning this is the price that I'm probably going to want to review with my owners to see if there's any flexibility. So let's say I put in 70, I can see now the minimum price drops below, and I have a little bit more flexibility in the short term in terms of pricing. Lastly, I wanted to share the customizations tab. So this is where you can get even more specific depending on what's happening in your market, drive to, fly to, short-term versus long-term strategies. First up, we have minimum and maximum prices. So if you wanted to set any sort of minimum price that differs from the annual minimum in the short term, you can do that. You can see here, I've set an example of a $16 per night minimum price for about the next month to give even more flexibility in terms of pricing. Next, we have minimum stays. So this listing currently has an annual minimum stay of 3 nights with gap filling turned on, meaning I'll allow bookings down to 1 night between reservations. And so we can create any more customization. So if you are in one of those more traditional markets that has very strict minimum stay requirements, it might be a good idea to come in here, take a look at the settings that you have, and try to get a little more flexibility as guests' travel plans, change in this uncertain market. Last up, I wanted to point out the last minute discount feature. So this is the conservative strategy that you can take. It also allows the algorithmic predicted prices to still be influenced. So I have an example in here of just tiered discounts out to 28 days. So essentially what this does is it creates discounting starting at 45% for bookings within 3 days, all the way out to a 25% discount for bookings within 28 days. The things to note on these, we won't go below your minimum price, so be sure you're reviewing that first, because even if I put a 99% discount in here, it would still cap out at that $90 minimum that I have in place. So that said, let me jump back in here and then share a couple of the strategies outside of pricing. So pricing is just one lever that you can pull in terms of, driving for any available demand, and then also once the market does recover, making sure that you're giving your property for the most attractive price to potential guests. I'm sure this list is nothing new to you if you're reading any other articles or attending any other webinars, but our team has put together some materials on our coronavirus support page, which is linked down here at the bottom, and Jesse pointed out earlier. Essentially what we're advising all of our customers to do, and what all of our best-in-class customers are doing today, is looking at their cancellation policies, seeing if they can offset revenue to a different time of year for new bookings, because this not only ensures that you have the revenue on the books, but also ensures that your owner will get that revenue at a different time of year. Also potentially discounting for longer stays. So if you are on the position to be able to convert any of your units to monthlies, adding some sort of discounting for those, or providing longer stays to guests that want to get away for a longer period of time. Another thing that we've seen is discounting towards future stays. So guests may not either be able to get to you now because of a travel ban, or they have a fear of traveling, or there's regulation in place that's banning short-term rentals in your market. But something that we've seen some of our property managers do that work with us is marketing to their existing and loyal guest customer base of saying, if you book now for next fall or 2021, we'll provide you a discount, some sort of credit, that kind of thing, just to maintain and foster those relationships with your repeat guests. Next up, I'm sure this is nothing new to you, but highlighting any cleaning procedures that you may have for your properties, and then also marketing to drive to customers. So as Jesse was saying earlier, it's really a minute by minute thing in terms of what's happening with regulation, but something that we have seen is an uptick in customers trying to get away by driving to a market that's close to them, and sheltering there instead. So all of that said, our team is here to help. Feel free to email our support@beyondpricing.com email, or talk to your account manager if you need strategies or help. We're here to weather this storm with you. So, let us know what we can do. So all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to questions so we can get that going.
Tess, thank you so much. And Jesse, thank you for your contribution earlier. So I think, while these are very tough times, and we obviously recognize this, I think what's great within the context of this webinar is hopefully you'll hear some really good advice and tips that you're getting. Also, what I'm liking is that we're getting some nice questions coming in. So I think this opens us up for a really productive Q&A session. Please keep the questions coming in. This is your opportunity to ask and get advice from Jesse and Tess, who are effectively at the coalface every single day and have got great insight, not just in the US, but in terms of globally about what's going on, and can give you a great perspective, particularly for your situation. So Jesse, one of the early questions that came in, I think this was related to the graphs, which was asked, are the cancellations on the day that they were cancelled or for the travel time of cancellation? So I don't know if you can respond to that.
Sure. So we showed both. The line charts were as of travel date. We did it by check-in date. And then the histograms were of actual date that the cancellations were made. So it's both. We'll provide the deck after this webinar, so you'll be able to review, but we do have both data sets.
Great, thank you. And I think, this is something that I'd imagine an awful lot of people are seeing out there. So the question is, every single new reservation request expects a deep discount off the advertised price. What is the best strategy for determining the actual rate we want to receive? Posting pricing through beyond pricing of 10 to 25% higher across the board, giving us the ability to offer a discount to each new reservation request. Tess, I don't know if you want to pick that one up first.
Sure. Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way that we think about discounting at Beyond Pricing is we are already giving that guest the most attractive price. So best practice that we've seen is advising that guest that's attempting to book that the price they are getting it for is the most competitive it can be. As opposed to inflating rates and then discounting on top of it, we're giving the guest the most attractive price right off across the board. And so using our last minute discounting feature, that nightly rate that they're getting is already going to be that discounted rate.
Perfect. Thank you, Tess. And I think I love this as we start to get the questions going. All of a sudden, the floodgates have opened up and we're getting a lot more questions pouring in. So please keep them coming. We've got some time available. We'll answer as many as we can. And for those we don't pick up, as we said, we'll definitely respond afterwards. So Tess, this is maybe another one for you, which is the question is, we anticipate some pent up demand for Key West once things reopen. This is evidenced with the number of people that want to rebook versus cancel. Will the cancellations drive down our advanced pricing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So today, if they haven't changed anything in terms of base rates, the pricing strategy is still the same for further out. So what we are doing as Beyond Pricing is not only looking at historical occupancy in their market, so this being Key West, but also looking at upcoming occupancy. So if we're seeing that occupancy still on the books and driving demand, we're going to continue to adjust as we normally would in a normal year, where more demand equals higher pricing. So that said, what our revenue management team is doing today is actively analyzing those markets to see where is demand being driven, what time of year. So I know in Key West, fall, springtime, winter are really big seasons. And so if we continue to see the demand and there isn't a fear of travel, there's no regulation in place, then rates should be kept high because guests still, there is still demand for those time periods. So what we would advise in that case is implement short-term pricing strategies. So whether it be manually overriding rates, using the COVID-19 factor as is, at getting last minute discounts for the short term, and then long term, taking that longer angle of keeping base prices high or keeping them where they were previous to the coronavirus outbreak, so that we can make sure that we're keeping those rates high as those guests look to rebook for later times of year.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think, so Tess, you're very much front and center at the moment. So the questions are definitely pouring in for you. Feel free to direct some in Jesse's direction as well for some of the data trends and insights as well. He's also got an awful lot to offer. I will, Tess, go back to you though, because I like this one a lot. I think, if we're not careful at Beyond Pricing, we get caught up in what the tool can do. And, obviously we're massive believers in both dynamic pricing as a concept, and then also the tool that we built, because we genuinely believe it makes a difference for the better and it's the right thing to have. But, for many of the people on the call, you're not a Beyond Pricing customer right now, and you want to know what can you actually do that is outside the tool. So this, this particular question is very much about that, Tess, which is, if somebody doesn't have the Beyond Pricing tool, what strategies and tactics can they still take around pricing and revenue management?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first things first, even if you aren't a customer of ours, you're welcome to use our coronavirus support page and look at any of the data, depending on your market, to try to inform your pricing decisions. So first thing first that I would suggest doing is discussing with your owners, having an open and honest conversation about what we expect or what you expect to happen in your market upcoming. So if that means average daily rates, ADR is going to be lower, that means that we're probably going to drive for occupancy later in the summer and later in the fall. And so what you can do is you can look at your current pricing structure and current pricing strategy and try to make an informed decision about what's happening in the market. So whether that means, seeing where you rank if you're listing on any of the OTAs like Vrbo, HomeAway, Booking.com, Airbnb, where does your property rank compared to similar properties? Of course, you wouldn't want to cheat off of a C or D student because you don't know how their pricing strategy is being informed, but it can be a good gut check to see what's going on in your overall market. And then the other thing that we would suggest doing is trying to implement some sort of strategy that doesn't rely on historical data to create your pricing strategy. Because we're going into uncharted territory, this is something that we've never seen before. It's similar to, when we've seen hurricanes or, natural disasters, that kind of thing. But at the same time, too, relying on historical data is not going to be enough. And so having a complete overhaul of your pricing strategy for next year is going to be pretty important. And having that open and honest conversations with your owners that your historically achievable rates are not going to be probably achievable, and that you may need to drive for occupancy instead.
Great. I mean, that's an incredibly comprehensive answer, and it's, I'm sure it's really appreciated. I would just add as well, which is one of the things that we're doing as Beyond Pricing. In fact, two of the things, which is we've made the resources pages available, and we'll share the link at the end again for that. And that's just free information for you to use. It has both data and insights on how the markets are evolving day by day. And it also has some practical hints, tips, advice on the strategies and actions that you can take to help shore up your business. The other thing that we're doing is we recognize that this is a time where it's difficult to make some big decisions. So if you want to link your account and get account level insights, we can also help you do that. And we are doing that free of charge. So there's no obligations for you at this point in time if you want to go ahead and do that. So Jesse, I think, let's shift gears a little bit. There's one for you here, which is so somebody who is a Beyond Pricing customer, and they are located in mid-Florida, West Coast, and they say they're not seeing any comp data for their region. So I don't know if you can just talk to that a little bit.
We have plenty of data, so I'd recommend, we're happy to help. Feel free to reach out, jesse@beyondpricing.com. Very happy to chat about it. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't in this presentation, but happy to dive in.
Great. So it's more a case of, we can't cover everything today, but, we've got the data behind it. And, one of the things we're absolutely saying is that, if you need to talk to us, please reach out and we can have a much more specific conversation to your situation. I guess that's where we are, isn't it, Jesse?
Yep, exactly. It was more of just trying to survey a lot of markets quickly, but certainly happy to chat.
Yeah, I think as we said at the outset, things are moving day by day and they're moving really fast. So the other thing to add, as we're going through this, and I'll say it again at the end, is this webinar isn't a one-off. We will run these as a series of webinars to help give you an ongoing series of insight, information, what we're seeing, and then how the advice is evolving over time as well. Tess, this may actually be back to you. So there's a question here which says, we have a traditional strict cancellation policy. Final balance due 90 days prior to arrival and then non-refundable. We are changing this ASAP to 45 days prior to arrival. This gives over summer bookings the time to see how the isolation strategy works. The question is here is, do you think summer travel will happen? Mostly drive to destinations overflying. So actually reading to the end of that question, maybe Jesse, if you want to comment first on the data trend, and then Tess, if you maybe want to add in any specific advice for that area.
Sure.
Hey, Matt, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, sure. So quite a long question, but I think, worthwhile, as you say, repeating. So the person's talking about the fact that they have a traditional strict cancellation policy. So final balance is due 90 days prior to arrival and then non-refundable. They're changing it. So they're getting a 45-day policy prior to arrival in place. They're really thinking about what's happening for the summer bookings and to see how the isolation strategy works. And I think the underlying question is, do we think that summer travel will still happen out to this region? And then B, I think, more for you, Tess, is, does this look like the right sort of cancellation policy?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think with, as far as summer goes, TBD, right? We're operating within a framework of independent actors, being the local government agencies, interfering in local markets. And so it's hard to know without knowing the sort of way that your local government works and what any cancellations might look like. Or at least forced cancellations might look like. I can say within the US, we haven't seen cancellations really take up in summer at all. Although, well, I shouldn't say at all, but we have seen it be much more mute than European markets. So I would say if I were setting up a strategy at this point, I would not discount too heavily in summer. I would keep it elevated, at least until we have more direction on where local agencies and federal response is going to go. But again, I mean, that's sort of the benefit of using beyond pricing, is we can adjust quickly throughout the year. I mean, we price 365 days forward. So just being dynamic, I would say, is the way to do it, but I would not discount heavily at this point for summer in the US.
And Tess, just to add to that, I mean, what are you seeing with your customers in terms of how are they changing their cancellation policies?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely a hot button issue right now. But I think best practice that we've seen is, first off, changing your cancellation policy to try to offset the revenue to a different time of year is a best practice. So what that actually means is, instead of just refunding the guest in full within that window or outside of that window, is trying to work with the guests to say, come back, in the fall instead, and you'll get 100% credit towards a future stay, or a 70% credit, that kind of thing. So instead of losing the revenue altogether, if your county, your city does put in regulation, or they want to cancel because of fear of travel, then you still get that revenue. It's just delayed to a different time of year. And then in terms of being more flexible by changing the timeline of your cancellation policy, that definitely is a good idea. At the same time too, you need to make sure that you can still keep the lights on. So, having that cash flow coming in and sticking to that cancellation policy to protect you and your business, and also your owners who, you're accountable to at the end of the day, is pretty important. So on a case-by-case basis, there really is no perfect answer and perfect cancellation policy, because at the end of the day, you still need to be in business, and you also, want to try to make the guest happy. But I think the best thing that I've seen property managers do is first offer that credit towards a future stay, as opposed to a full refund. And then if the full refund is needed, charging some sort of, reservation change fee or cancellation fee, just to cover the admin costs of that reservation and cancellation. Because it takes time for, your reservationists to answer the phone, the back and forth over email, the negotiation. It's a lot of time, big investment on your side, going back and forth of what that guest's options are. So, trying to cover your costs in any way is best practice there.
Great. And I guess this is one of the broader points we're making, which is, we understand that as property managers, that you have to balance the seesaw, don't you, between what your guests are looking for in terms of flexibility, and then on the other side, what your owners need in terms of getting some income and trying to get some predictability. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so just to, let's talk about one of the elephants in the room, because, we know that things are very tough out there, and we know that restrictions are, becoming ever more severe. And so, for example, where we are in California, we've now actually effectively got lockdown. So, the question here is, how can PMs actually market the discounts in a state that already has severe restrictions on social distancing? And so California being a really good example of that. And actually my home country, the UK, which did this in the last 24 hours or so. So, is there anything that can be done here, or effectively are we on pause for, for guests at this point in time? Tess, maybe if you start on that one.
Yeah, it's a delicate subject for sure, because you don't want to seem like you're taking advantage of the coronavirus panic or travel trends, or the sickness that is going on by doing some sort of mass marketing campaign. That is to say, we have actually seen it done very tastefully. So a couple of customers in our drive-to markets are using, their attractive offers like keyless entry, their cleaning standards, an attractive price to say, instead of sheltering in your home, come shelter in our vacation rental. Of course, that depends on the regulation that might be happening in your county and market, and what your local government is allowing you to do in terms of short-term vacation rentals. So probably what we would suggest is attempting to market to any drive-to customers that you may have, to say, that you are there for them as a resource, get out of house, with the kids for a bit, just for a change of scenery. At the same time too, you need to be cognizant. So if you are in one of those crackdowns, a short-term pricing strategy is not going to help. Even if you offer the property at $0, if guests can't get to you because there are travel bans in place, or you're in a fly to market that has a lockdown, or you have regulation on short-term vacation rentals, it doesn't matter what price the property is listed at, guests are still not going to be able to get to you. Which, if that is the case, then switching to a marketing strategy that talks about next season, next fall, creating that loyalty in your current customer base to say, we're here for you, you will be back next season, that kind of thing instead. So, it's really dependent on the situation and what's going on.
Yeah. So as you said, like no simple answer really, and it's about being sensitive to what's happening in the market and the needs of the community. I think we've got time for a couple more questions, and we have way more questions coming in actually than we can answer, which is great. And as I said before, we will respond to every single question. If we don't get it now, we'll absolutely follow up afterwards. I like addressing the serious issues as well in these broader ones. And somebody actually asked a question where they said, I'm not sure you'd be comfortable in answering this, but it's a question that talks about the fact that what is the effect and how severe do we think it will be in terms of really the economic impact of coronavirus, what effect it's going to have on travel, how is it going to affect unemployment, and what effect will it have on demand and pricing. So I think, again, as Jesse would say, quite a lot to unpack. I'll actually kick it off, which is I think what we're seeing at Beyond Pricing is two things. So we're seeing in the short term that property managers and revenue managers are struggling to come to terms with the new reality that's almost happened overnight. So many are doing an awful lot of quick adjustment of their business, and there's some tactical short-term things that can be done, and then there's some broader things that are being put in place, and unfortunately in some cases we're seeing some layoffs as well. The other thing that we're seeing there, and I think we want to paint a bit of a positive note here as well and not make everything doom and gloom, is a lot of property managers are taking the time to take a step back from the day-to-day operations of their business and actually review how is their business being run and what can they potentially do better in the future. And that's where I think that, there's an opportunity for a bit of reflection and to see what you could improve. And Jesse, I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to that as well.
Yeah, that is a lot to unpack, as I said earlier. I mean, for sure, consumption is going to be down. So as we're trying to figure out what's the overall economic impact, a big part of the GDP formula is going to be consumption, and that's people out there spending money. That's impacted by employment. We've seen a number of layoffs. So within kind of the economic numbers that are coming out, I would expect a slowdown. I think Goldman came out 5% reduction. A number of other banks are right around there as far as GDP goes. But Matt, you talked about it a little bit. We are seeing some strong points. So if you look at some of the data coming out of China right now, it's relatively muted, but a pretty quick bounce back in the hospitality sector over recent days. There are some pockets of good news of folks that are a little bit further along in this overall scare of the hospitality industry is rebounding and good things happening. But certainly do expect for consumption to be down over the near term, which should have some effects throughout the economy.
Thank you, Jesse. And I think we're pretty much at time. And I think, what Jesse's just given is a pretty balanced response, which is we know and understand that it's very tough for many of you out there. Also, I think what we've demonstrated and talked to a little bit is actually there are variances in market by market, and some markets are certainly much more badly affected than others. And that looking forward, there are, rays of hope. Jesse talked really nicely about the China market. And I think more broadly what we see is, and also what we believe, is that this is one of the most vibrant entrepreneurial sectors in the travel and tourism market. And that we have a firm belief that we'll get through this. It's going to be really tough. But actually, as we do get through this industry will bounce back and will come back stronger. So on that note, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Tess and Jesse for making the time today to share their perspective, their thoughts and advice on this topic. Hopefully you found it useful. I'd also like to thank you for taking the time out to attend today. We know it's really busy. We know there's an awful lot going on. So thank you for making the time to attend and to share your ideas and your questions. That's been fantastic. We will run this as a regular series of webinars because we realize that the situation is changing on an almost day-by-day basis. So keep a lookout for more webinars coming through. Also, as we said, go on to our support page. We have a daily updated page which talks about coronavirus, the market trends that are happening, and gives you advice and information that you can take to make better business decisions. And I think, as I said, just now, is we think that together we are best placed to weather the storm, and that we will emerge stronger from this. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to wish the very best to you, to everyone in your business, and also to your families as well. It's a time where we have an opportunity to be stronger together. And with that, have a really good day. Thank you for joining.